What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pitch Please podcast. And today on the Rocket Fuel episode, we're going to be talking about something that I think is oftentimes a very common topic in the world of startups, which is money and funding. And how do you get enough of it to sustain what you're trying to do? There's lots of different types of money. We can talk about debt, we can talk about dilutive funding. But at the essence of it all is how do you think about managing and unlocking cash flow? Because at the end of the day, when you take on money or get money or have money, part of this is how do you preserve it? How do you maximize the impact to drive growth in your startup? Money is not the prize, is sometimes what I've been told, which I think I would fully agree with. It is the outcomes that you drive. So I think we'll talk a little bit about that today. And to talk about this topic, I brought on Ali and Kevin. Maybe I'll pass it over to you guys. You can talk to us a little bit about why you have some expertise in this area, and then we'll dive in to really help people unlock more in their Canadian businesses.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having us on, Mike. Happy to start us off and then hand it over to Ali, where our story kind of crosses over. So my name is Kevin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Humi. And about 9 years ago, I set off to solve employment for Canadian companies. So the idea was to build a single platform that brought all the different elements that are required to hire somebody in Canada: HR, payroll, health benefits administration, and more recently, R&D tax credits. And so this is kind of where my path crossed with Ali, and we joined forces. And so happy to hand it over there for a sec.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, similar to Kevin, around the same time that he was part of founding the founder story of Humi. I actually just finished my studies and started working at a fairly new startup. And as a process of that, it was in the world of robotics and software engineering. We had to keep track of our time and do timesheets, documentation. And slowly I realized why it was because of the whole SR&ED funding story. And so that was my introduction into the SR&ED world. And a few years later, I entered the world of SR&ED and have been there ever since. And realized some pain points, which we're going to go over fairly soon. And Kevin and I met a while ago and realized that we're a good match. So here we are.
Yeah, it's probably worth adding that before we get into different types of funding and their impact on business, the best type of funding to grow any business is non-dilutive funding. That is customer funded dollars. Making revenue, growing your business based on that, there's just no substitute. In Canada, we have this magical thing called SR&ED that is given by the government to incentivize a lot of people to help invest more in innovation and to support their employment of people. And that's effectively what's brought us into this world.
Yeah, so maybe let's start there, Kevin, which is on this piece of dilutive funding, debt, non-dilutive funding that's aligned to customer outcomes and goals. Can you just give the high level of maybe what those are, but why this is the best type of funding in case anyone's not clear on why they should be thinking about it as the best type of funding?
Yeah, I think for any entrepreneur, it's really important for them to understand the cost of capital. Um, you know, when you go to look, when you utilize resources to build and sustain your company, how expensive and how available and how renewable is that resource? And different things come with different strings attached. You can do equity financing, you bring on investors and they jump on the ride with you. You can do the debt financing piece if you're at a certain point where you have a very repeatable process. But debt can be friendlier, but can also function as a bit of a ticking time bomb. And then, like I said, the best version of funding is one that doesn't dilute your ownership in the business and allows you to reinvest into the future in growth and sustaining the company and customer funded dollars. Or again, if you run a business in Canada, there are all sorts of really fantastic programs that exist to support small businesses. And as long as the investment that's required to get those dollars isn't harmful to the company, that's an awesome alternative to needing to find investors to dilute your cap table, or to put some sort of debt on your books that you're going to be responsible for paying back later.
So someone, either of you, but this concept of customer funded, what do you mean by that? It's a term I've heard a few times, but it was new to me, and so I'm sure it's new to many that are listening. Like, what the heck do you mean customer funded? Isn't that revenue?
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's a
so
very
what do
fun
you mean by
concept. A
that?
lot of early stage companies making money by selling your product as a means of growing your company. Again, like every company is so different. Your path to product market fit, your investment to be able to get to the place you want to get to. Every business needs to be very considerate of what that true path is. If you have this like crazy hard tech problem, you may need like tens of millions of dollars and years of investment before you can get that first dollar. If you have a consultancy or a relatively straightforward piece of software, you may be able to get that out into the world and start selling it from day one and not needing to depend on other sources for financing. And so, yeah, it's revenue. It's going out in the world and selling your product. Not everybody can be afforded that luxury. And in a lot of ways, this is why SR&ED exists. The government wants to incentivize entrepreneurs to take bigger bets, to materialize like new technology in Canada, because that's what, in a lot of cases, creates a ton of new jobs for us.
Interesting. And so, Ali, you're like, I'm gonna say you're like the godfather of SR&ED. If anyone looks you up on LinkedIn, they see SR&ED before it was even a 4-letter acronym in your resume. But it probably should have an A in there for Ali, but it doesn't. Can you just start us off with like, if we're talking about the value of customer funded, and we're talking about this Canadian specific benefit, and the majority of our listeners are Canadian, and we really focus on the Canadian ecosystem, what is SR&ED? And how should people be thinking about it as Canadian entrepreneurs? And is it also, I think a piece of that is it just for entrepreneurs, or is this thing for startups too? And who's it for?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to actually start to break it down as simple as possible. So SR&ED stands for, we call it SR&ED, but it's SR&ED, and it stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. So fairly straightforward and simple if you look at the name and try to break it down. As long as the work that you do fits into that criteria, you have a say into it. And now to add to what Kevin was saying, about the importance of such program, this is a retroactive program. So you spend some amount of money throughout the year, and when it's time to claim your or to submit your taxes, it's part of your tax return, and you can submit the projects and the expenditures that you incurred throughout the year working on such projects to get some sort of refund back from the CRA. Now, good thing about this program is that contrary to other grants that are more looking at the future, and you're kind of competing with other companies to get access to a certain amount of pool, as long as you do eligible work that fits into that eligibility criteria, you have the right to get those credits back. So you spend some money, but at least you're sure that by doing eligible work, you can get access to those funds. That pretty much is fairly self-explanatory. So if we want to get into more of a discussion about what constitutes a SR&ED eligible project, and how we can identify eligibility, I can certainly go into that conversation as well.
Yeah, I think I'll want to get to that. Maybe the first is like SR&ED eligibility company. Like, how big do you need to be? It sounds like it's like, when I hear words like scientific research and experimental development, I hear things that are before a customer dollar comes in the door. And then Kevin kind of talked about some dollars coming in to go fuel. Can you just I guess there's probably a spectrum of people listening, everyone from like the student that has dreams to build a startup to more mature companies that are not maybe traditional startups, like they're not in tech as an example, but they're still a business. And so they're probably wondering if this is for them, or is this just for these like fast growing software companies? So maybe you can help profile like the size, some criteria to think about, so that the listeners can start to box and chunk themselves into,
Yeah.
is this for me, or when is it for me, would be first.
Definitely, yeah. So there is no limitation in terms of the type of company and the amount of resources that you allocate to the projects, et cetera, et cetera. You can be any type of company, big or small, and still have access to these credits. Obviously, there are differences in terms of how much refund you can expect based on the size of the company that you have and the type of project you do, and so on and so forth. So to simplify it, if you're thinking about starting a new company, right? Usually, what you do is, as a Canadian, when you open a company, you're considered as a CCPC or Canadian Controlled Private Corporation. So, as a CCPC, you usually have access to the highest rate of refund when you do eligible work. Obviously, even if you are non-CCPC, meaning that you are, let's say, an American company which owns a Canadian subsidy within Canada, you can still get those credits back, but at a lower rate of refund. So there is really no limitation in terms of what type of company can claim these credits. It's just that when you're looking at the type of refund and how much you can get back, that's where the variations come in.
I think it's also worth mentioning, oftentimes people will bucket tech companies. When they think about tech companies, they think about like people just writing software. But the truth is, there are like all sorts of companies that I would consider doing innovative and like scientific or like uncertain work with uncertainty wherein they can claim shred. So it's not just computer programming. If you're a beverage company and you're dreaming up a like new formula for a new beverage, that is effectively can go into that bucket. Al, you must have a million fun, like weird examples. It'd be cool to say a couple of them.
Yeah, give us
Yeah,
some of those
yeah,
things.
for sure.
The
I mean,
beverage one was a cool one because probably it wouldn't have been people's first thought as an example, right?
definitely, yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind, mainly based on the Canadian market and what we see is obviously like software engineering, all these like high tech, markets that are doing work. But based on experience, obviously like I've worked with companies that have done projects in agriculture, let's say manufacturing. Kevin mentioned like food and beverage, brewery, even
Cool.
construction, mechanical engineering. So to I think everybody can just also find out more information by just looking at all the fields of sciences. So here's the thing. I think there's a little bit of a distinguishing between what type of company can claim and what type of project, right? So the SR&ED program doesn't necessarily look at the business, but rather the type of science that they're doing projects in. So it's more important on what field of science your project falls into rather than the market and the type of business that you have from a business logic perspective. But yeah, you can, as long as you're doing research and development to make advancement in the state of technology in the field of science that you're doing work, it kind of falls into that eligibility criteria. So the possibilities are endless in terms of
Yeah,
what type of business can claim.
I think a really simple way to think about it is if you're trying to improve the way your company does something or that the industry does something, and that can apply to any type of company, very likely that work is eligible for shred credits or for the shred program. And I don't even know if we've mentioned this, but the rates of return is quite generous. So for every dollar spent on somebody's salary who's doing this type of work, I believe it's up to, is it 66 or 67%?
Yeah, 64, 65%, and the rate of refund kind of changes based on the province that the company is located in. But yeah, the highest rate of refunds are around 64, 65%.
Yeah. So
Wow.
you can imagine like if you get 65 cents back for every dollar spent on somebody's salary, it opens up the way you can invest in those types of people within your company and really progressing the way a company is operating or like and maybe pushing the limits of like what exists in an industry.
That's cool. So maybe this is actually a good probably segue to start talking about those projects. In terms of like what they come into, what are the things you can fund. So I heard, Kevin, you talking about like a percentage back on the dollars you invest in people's time and energy, and maybe it's certain types of roles. Is it CapEx? Is it OpEx? So maybe if you can start to shape up the types of projects for us, that would be really helpful to understand where and what types of things. Now that we have, the punchline on the company bit before we kind of close that chapter, anybody, really, like
Yep.
full stop. The likelihood is you're more likely eligible than ineligible as a company. There's like maybe a 1% scenario we haven't talked about. And these are organizations from like very small to probably, it sounds like, fairly large, as long as the things that you're doing start to align to these project basis. Is there a cap, by the way? I should just kind of clarify that on company.
Yeah, so technically there is a $3 million cap in terms of expenditures where you have access to the higher rate of refund, but anything above that threshold, you still get a refund, but at a lower rate. So technically, you're good for fairly high amount of expenditures
But if
you're
I'm a
covered.
large company, that doesn't omit me as long as there's something within my company that I'm driving against project work that fits the criteria.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about that, to those types of projects. What's sort of that spectrum? What is it fun?
Yeah, so again, like projects are, you need to look at the type of business that is operating, and also the field of science that the work is being applied in. But to give you some quick examples, let's say you're developing a new product in again, like most common theme that we see is software engineering, right? And let's say if you're developing a new product. There's two ways to think about this. Some companies, they say, I want to be eligible for SR&ED, so let me think about a project or a product that would fit into that eligibility criteria. So how can I do this work that would fit into that bucket? And some companies, they're actually like developing that product or improving that existing product, but are looking for leeways and paths that, this part of my work applies to SR&ED, so I can claim this amount. So there's two ways you can think about that. The best way to think about it is probably a hybrid of both, where, if you haven't started the work, then you can maybe think of ways of how you can make it eligible for SR&ED purposes and go that path. If you think about the common themes of experimental development and research, it usually falls into, first of all, identifying challenges and limitations within this existing state of technology. So if you're doing some sort of work, you identify that there is some sort of limitation within that existing state of technology, which requires you to go kind of above and beyond, and doing some sort of experimentation on your own in order to identify a solution. And usually that takes you towards the path of trying out a solution, seeing whether or not it works, drawing some conclusions, trying a second iteration of that, so on and so forth, until you either resolve your problem or you have your problem unresolved until the end of that tax fiscal year. Good thing about this program is that the more you fail, the better, because that means you get more dollars back. Technically, when you solve a problem and your project is finalized, your SR&ED project is finished, because SR&ED really goes hand in hand with experimentation and resolving uncertainties. So if you have a project that doesn't finish within a year, even better. You can claim it again the year after and the year after. So that's why companies, you see, like sometimes they start a project this year and then they're still claiming it a few years after, because it just takes so long to resolve some of those challenges.
The uncertainty is a really, so I've been now doing SR&ED for almost 15 years over the course of 2 different companies. And what I've noticed is that partnering up with a great technical writer, the thing that they're going to do for you is help you understand the uncertainty within your work. Sometimes people are so baked into the things that they're doing that they don't see the or they don't understand. It's harder for them to describe uncertainty in a way that the government is asking for it to be presented to them. And I think that's one of the real benefits of working with somebody who is seasoned and has the type of history in this world that Ali does.
That's an interesting way that you frame that, because I guess as you're kind of talking through it, I think what I'm hearing is, in the hybrid scenario, you probably don't want to make a make work project, because you're going to have to fund this anyway with some of your own dollars, and then you'll get some percentage back. So you don't want to just do it for the sake of doing it. So ideally, you're thinking about directionally, where's my company need, like, where can we do something that, if and when right, will help us advance our company, and then apply in that space. But what you're saying is, if you're always backwards looking, you maybe didn't structure yourself always in the most optimal way. So that's, I imagine that's where you mean in the balance, right?
Yeah, and I would push back on the idea of doing work just for the sake of getting a grant, because ultimately that's not the way you want to use your resources. But we often like forget that in developing a new product, there's like a million little decisions that have to be made using a certain type of code, designing it in a different way, testing it in a different way. And these are all points of uncertainty that we have to manage and work through, and are things that a really good technical writer are going to be able to pull out of the work that was done to help and make sure like the claim is well done with the government, or well received, excuse me.
That's a good point. So I guess actually, when I think about it, and I'm sure others are probably thinking this too, if you haven't heard of Shred piece, if you have, you've definitely heard about it a lot. You've heard about it from your accountant. You've had people in your LinkedIn inbox, in your email inbox, all willing to help you write a Shred grant and position it to help supplement some funding for your organization. I imagine they're not all created equal, just based on what you're saying. And so, like, what are some of the components in someone evaluating who or how to get help in this that make a difference? I imagine part of it is the writer themselves, but part of it is some other elements of information surrounding it. You know, maybe there's some trade secrets that you don't have to share all, but at least, like, what, like, should I be just going to my accountant that's asking me, hey, do you want me to apply for Shred to you? Or is there a better science to how you should be thinking about this to do it the right way?
Yeah, so I'm happy to. There are a number of things about the world of Shred that pulled me into launching Shred as a business within Humi that I think are very relevant here. So for a lot of companies, Shred is not a super accessible program. A, because it might be too much of an operational load for the company to manage. And then two, oftentimes external consultants and technical writers can be really expensive to work with. And the idea that if we already had access to your data, and if we already had a relationship with you in helping support your company and the like employment of those people, we could not only like make it easier for people to do, saving them time on the claim, but we could also like materially reduce the cost. These are interesting factors to consider. The number one thing I would say, even above these things, is a level of trust and certainty with the person who is going to be doing the work. It's one of the things that attracted me to Ali. Incredible communicator, amazing history. I mean, he's grown. I effectively like was the founding technical writer and grew the fastest like independent consultancy in Canada, and he has experience with the Big Four, so he knows both sides of the coin. Generally, in Canada, you have one of two things: you have an independent consultancy, or you have somebody from the Big Four, a Deloitte or MNP or BDO. And I've had experiences with both. They haven't been great in the past with the Big Four. Take it for a grain of salt. Not everybody's the same, but I've tended to found that they were extremely bureaucratic and slow, and there was tons of turnover in the person I worked with, which is why I've like tended to be more with independent consultancies. But even then, I find that they tend to be quite expensive, charging 20% of like the value of the claim. And so, I think trust is like the top on your list because you're also sharing sensitive information about the work you're doing. The capital could be important for your operations. So you want to make sure that you have confidence in the work being done. And then after that, I'd be really thoughtful about how the provider's thinking about supporting your company and the claim. And, obviously extremely biased because I'm hoping we're building one of the best Shred experience that anybody could possibly get. But yeah, and Ali, if I missed anything, are there any nuances from this world that probably also
Yeah,
work?
no, I think you did a great job covering, the main differentiators. But yeah, from my own personal experience, like working in different Shred consultancies and providers, one of the main issues that I see in traditional firms is the uh, great amount of back and forth that it requires to go between the consultant and the founder, CTO. It's a lot of time that usually like these traditional firms use from the company in order to prepare those shred claims and submit them, which is not great, right? So it's the whole process is kind of broken, and it varies a lot between company to company. So each company keeps track of their work in a certain way that differs from the next company. So every time this process needs to be replicated and repeated. So what we're trying to do at Humi is kind of break that chain and make the whole process smoother, faster, more efficient, and as Kevin mentioned, most importantly, much cheaper. So that's the whole point.
I guess that makes sense if you're trying to go after money. There's no point of going after money that you're not getting 100% of the money you're spending and then giving up 50 or 60% of that, because you won't be left with a lot at the end of that. What are the I guess it begs the question, what are the inputs and what are the documents required? You talked about how, you have some ability to help people do this more efficiently and effectively if they're a Humi customer already. Um, what are some of the things that if you are trying to seek out shred funding are inputs or documents or things that people might need to be wrapping their arms around in advance?
So most importantly is, when you are doing the work and you identify shred eligible projects, the first and most important thing is documentation, because without documentation, there is no way for you to prove that you did that type of work within the year that you're claiming it. So contemporaneous documentation is the most important input that you can provide for the shred claims. In order to prepare a shred claim, you need two different sides of an equation. One is technical, which describes the project. It's pretty much, if you want to think about it, it's an essay that is answering different questions to where was the limitation, what was the work that was performed to resolve that limitation, and what was the conclusion drawn or the advancement made to this existing state of the technology. So that's the technical part, and usually that is work. If you're working with a consultant, they help you draft that. If not, then you can do it also internally. But the second part of the equation is the financial part, and that goes hand in hand with the project. So as you're doing this project, you need to understand who was working on it, how much time they were spending on it, and what that translates into in terms of dollar figures. And once you calculate that, that's the second part of the claim that goes as submission with your tax forms, and if there is a review from the CRA, then you need to be able to defend it by providing existing available documentation that you were keeping track of throughout the year. So that goes both in terms of technical and financial. Financial meaning like the money that you spent on the project and the time that you spent on the projects.
And just to tie this back to just make this hopefully a little bit more relevant to the companies who are probably chiming in, on the documentation side for software companies, it's typically Linear, Jira, GitHub, Asana, anywhere where the project management tracking is happening. That is usually where the information is taken from to put the project side of it together. And then on the expenditure and employee information side, it's typically the employee system of record and your payroll provider, which is why Humi is such like a beautiful union of the two. We have access to like 50% of all the information you need to put this thing together, so it's less back and forth. It's also allows us to be more insightful on our end about what you could potentially be claiming, because there are a lot of people who will leave a lot of dollars on the table. And if we can look into the employee system of record and identify expenditures that a company might not have put forward, can actually result in more capital coming back to companies at the end of the day.
It's interesting as you guys are talking about it. It's probably very similar to how the general population thinks about taxes, which is sort of they wait till that moment and then they're asked for a bunch of documentation and then they start digging it up and then they hand it all over and it goes into a magic machine and out comes an answer and you hope you did it right. And maybe you're like, what do you mean I owe $100,000? I wish I was spending on more marketing or more. I didn't know I could do that. And what you're saying is actually, like any other tax, it is very useful to have a proactive strategy in the same way that, like, don't wait till the end of the year to try to calculate all of your mileage. It won't go well. You should be doing that all the way along. Don't wait till the end of the year to try to like find all your receipts and tally and categorize your spend. It won't go well. Proactively think about where you want to go and start to plan against that so you can document it along the way so you've got the things. So it almost sounds also like the shred process sometimes might start, or maybe it best starts before you even hire the roles against these projects. There's like here's what I'm trying to do. Can you give me guidance on am I thinking about the problem I'm trying to solve in the right way? And then before you kind of kick it off, is that accurate? Or, I mean, it's never too late, I'm sure, but I imagine if you're proactive on and thinking forward about this, is that the best way to think about it?
100%. So there's a delicate balance between how much proactiveness
Okay.
you would want when it comes to the shred program, and also the amount of time that you want to spend actually thinking about doing shred. When, as a consultant, when I'm working, let's say, with a company that is planning to claim shred, there is only a certain amount of time that I want to leverage from them in order to provide them with important feedback throughout the year. So the more automated we can make this approach, the more beneficial it would be at the end. So that's why one of the main advantages of Humi is having access to all that information, where we can provide that feedback throughout the year without actually having to take that time from companies. As an example, if you knew the amount of resources that you have and how much of those resources you're allocating to certain projects, you know on the go how much shred credits you're getting back on a month-to-month basis, week-to-week basis, just by figuring out the amount of time that they're spending on the shred projects and which projects they're working on. So providing that feedback is essential for companies to adjust their approach and know which projects they want to focus more on, and also having a real-time feedback on the amount of dollars that they're generating through shred.
Makes sense. Well, I guess what's cool here too, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Kevin, but I think it's probably wise that someone that's got pretty, convicted passion for how to think about shred as a founder of a Canadian company focused on the Canadian market who's been a user of shred. How have you thought about that? And maybe even like share some pitfalls along the way. I imagine now you're like on the sharpest end of the spear of how you think about this, but maybe some pitfalls along the way, or how you think about weaving this into whether it's been the build of your previous startup or whether it's been Humi, and how you think about this as a part of creating this unlocking of cash flow, if you will, to growth.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple sides to the coin here. Considering I've been doing this for 15 years and have quite a few friends who have companies also doing this, it seems pretty apparent that there's a cottage industry within Canada of consultancies who do this work. And they take entirely too much of the value away from the companies who should be benefiting from it. And I think that was it was certainly a huge part of us launching this. How do we make it more accessible for more companies and keep more of the innovation, the dollars that are meant to fuel innovation and support Canadian employment with the Canadian companies? And then the other side of this is it's a material amount of money for a lot of companies, whether you are operating at scale or you're just trying to get to product market fit. For a company to get back a couple $100,000 a year might be the difference. Might be 3 to 6 months of runway, the difference between making it or not. I think as an entrepreneur, you do everything and anything to make sure your business gets to the place it needs to get to. And the fact that it's such a generous program and that it is like very specifically meant to encourage the things that a lot of technology and like startup people want to do, it's really important for people to be aware of it and to take advantage of it. As a free market entrepreneur, all this stuff, like you tend to not, normally you wouldn't skew towards these types of government things, but like as a business builder, you just want to put your business in the best place it can. It's a really advantageous program that a lot of people should be taking advantage of. Did I
Makes
miss
sense.
that? Sorry, did I veer
No,
off a
I
little
think
bit
I
too
think that makes
much?
sense, but it raised another question, which is, did you find along the way, or because it's aligned to taxation, is it tricky to balance like when you receive the shred
Oh, yes,
refund
yes,
with
yes,
the
yes,
forward
yeah,
investment? I think that's a piece that's top of mind, which is like,
yeah.
Kevin,
So
my bank account is pretty light right now, and I want to invest in these three people, but it sounds like I'm not getting it back till tax season. I don't know if I have the $500,000 runway. And when you talked about runway, it kind of brought that thought to my mind.
yeah, so but budgeting is a really important component of this that can be solved by working with a firm that has a good relationship with a um, there are providers of debt who will finance your SR&ED work. And so if you have a history of claims and there's a level of certainty with respect to you getting the next one, there are a lot of companies out there that will forward you that capital. And so understanding when you can get access to those dollars or when those dollars are going to come in to be able to reinvest them in OpEx or in growth or in like just like existing as a company is really, really important and something that a good um, partner, in helping you with shred credit is going to be able to help you guide you within. There's a lot of uncertainty here because when you send a thing away to the government and you just like, you put it into that black box and you just wait for somebody to come out. Sometimes you get an answer and you get your capital back within a month. Sometimes it's 2, 3 months. There's certainly like a level of uncertainty there that is impossible to manage, but there's a lot around that working with a great provider is going to help you like do really well in understanding like generally when the money's going to come, generally how much you're going to get. Those are the really important things most business builders are going to want to know for planning purposes and budgeting.
Does the money come only at your fiscal end as a company, at the personal year-end taxes, or is it like throughout, depending on how the proposal's been built?
Yeah, so depending on what setup you opt in for, you can expect a number of different ways. If you're only claiming shred through the CRA, so meaning like you do it the regular way, you have to submit your tax return first. The CRA processes your tax return, which includes the shred claim, embedded within. And then once they process it, then you can expect the funds. So typically speaking, the CRA promises an 8-week turnaround window once you submit your tax return until they process your shred claim and you receive a refund. So once your tax year ends, about a couple of months later, you can get the funds back. Now, if you go through the route that Kevin mentioned and you decide to fund your shred claim throughout the year, you can opt in to receive it, how regular, I think you agree. Usually, like you can do it maybe monthly or quarterly, semi-yearly. But then there's an APY and the interest associated with it that you have to pay back once you get the shred refund at the end of the year. So you have a couple of different options here.
That makes sense. So I think we touched on it, but I don't know if it was perfectly clear for all listeners. What can be funded with shred? Can I fund a part-time contractor? Can I fund an external service? Can I fund a part-time employee, a full-time employee, a capital expenditure? What gets covered under shred and what doesn't get covered under shred?
Yeah, good question. So, Shred covers mainly three different types of expenditures. One is full-time salaried employees. Obviously, like if you, even as a founder, you can employ yourself, and as long as you have a T4 and you're paying yourself throughout the year, you can claim yourself as an employee of your own company, plus all the other employees. Second category is contractor expenditures. Key thing here is that the contractor needs to be in Canada and the work needs to be done within Canada. So if the contractor is offshore, unfortunately, you cannot claim those expenses. However, one thing that the founders should know is that the rate of refund of a salaried employee is much, much higher than a contractor. So if you're getting back around 64, 65% for an employee, you can expect to get back close to 30% for a contractor. So it's not very comparable and not as interesting to have contractors. Obviously, business needs come first. So yeah, if you have contractors, you can still claim them
That
as
can be
long
like
as
a
they're doing
part-time
diligent.
contractor. Like if I've got someone that I'm paying for like 5 or 10 hours a week
Yeah.
in some capacity, like a vendor of mine in some way, that can be. It just might not be the same magnitude as a full-time employee.
Exactly. Yeah. So you
As
can
long
still
as
claim
they're
them.
Canadian based, doing the work in Canada,
Yeah.
that
Yeah. And depending on the type of work that you do, so if you're a software company, this is not really relevant, but if you fall into other categories, then you might be, let's say, buying some material to develop, some sort of artifact that you're burning through. And so that material is also something that you can claim as part of
mm,
the expenditures. So those three categories are the main type. Something that you need to also keep in mind is if you're claiming any other type of grants that fall into the other bucket of they're not retroactive, but they're you're basically applying for projects that you haven't done yet, and you successfully get those grants. If they cover your shred expenditures, meaning Ali is doing shred work and has a salary of I don't know X amount, but part of that is covered by the grant, we cannot claim your full salary. We have to deduct the part that was covered by the grant. So that's just a adjustment to be made at the end of the year. But yeah, four things to think about: three expenditures and one deduction.
that makes sense. And I'm sure it was on everyone's mind. And I think sometimes because people, it makes sense. There's a couple components here where there is that reactive, like I wait till tax season, I use my accountant, and maybe that works if it's like one employee or something, I guess. But then to your point, you're maybe not getting as proactive. You're not thinking about the areas of growth. You're not unlocking the cash flow or the capital along the journey. You're kind of waiting until a year-end moment. But yet you're paying and remitting HST and possibly taxes along the way. And so you should think about the overall cash flow state of your business. But I think it's good to know about the contractors piece because some people assume, we can never commit to hiring a full-time employee. We just don't have enough cash flow for that yet. So I hire someone part-time, 20 hours a week. We pay them. They're an independent contractor. That it might not have the same magnitude, and probably you should do the cost benefit analysis of like, could you just hire them on full time and it actually is more efficient in the long run? But if not, you can still claim against those things as well. And consumables, to your point, if it's consumables against the evaluation and scientific process of something.
Exactly. Yeah. So that conversation comes in fairly often where companies are evaluating whether it's worth it for them to employ full time or hire as a contractor. And so full time employment has some costs associated to it. And there's always this discussion of, oh, so if they are employed and apply for shred and they are 100% eligible, then that means I'm getting this much back. Does that cover all the expenses of a full time employee or no? So for all of that, you can definitely use services of a consultant and make those decisions in advance.
So, based on everything we've covered, I think to kind of put a bow around it, has there anything, either based on how you are seeing the landscape of shred or anything based on your own learning journey of things I'm sure you've done right and maybe even things you've done wrong? And it's been good, Kevin, because you're usually really honest about this of like, hey, just learn from my faults. Don't always do as I do because I've learned. Is there anything people should know that we haven't yet covered today? And then also, if they want to find out more or they do want help on this, where should we be sending people?
Yeah, so I think we covered most of the bases. Obviously, even for myself, I've been in this space for I think close to 10 years now. And every once in a while, I come across a situation that I just don't know the answer to. So there's always like new things to learn, new information. So probably we haven't touched on some stuff. Yeah, if anybody is interested to claim shred and needs a consultant to take a closer look or give you a better idea of what sort of projects qualify, what is the expected rate of refund and how much they can expect back, Humi is able to help them with their claims. And if there is a tie-in with other services, then greater advantage because the whole process becomes much more smooth and everything becomes cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is a lot of people have questions about whether the work they do is eligible or not. You should just ask. If you have that question, that there's probably a good chance it is, and we're more than happy to have the conversation and be very, like to your point, honest about whether we can be the best provider for you, or maybe we help you find somebody who's even better because you have some weirdly nuanced, like subspecialized technical thing. And yeah, so humi.ca, pretty easy to find and always open to having the conversation.
Awesome. And I think what's an important piece of there, and I'll do the self promotion for you guys, but if you're thinking about shred, I think Kevin and Ali talked about it, where if you also have employees, you can benefit from the platform that Humi has on the employee side of the house, and then also benefit from the shred piece. So think about them in both regards. Obviously, today we're talking about shred, but a piece of that also flows upon the efficiency that they talked about.
I will also add that we're running we want to facilitate the entirety of somebody's employment, and we want to, like, this is such a like fantastic tool, the software platform of HR payroll that everybody needs. And for a lot of companies, we're just going to give it to them completely for free. Who does the shred work? It makes it easier for us, for them. And so this is an interesting promotion that we're running. And if people are interested, they should inbound and make sure they mention that they heard this on the podcast. And,
Awesome.
to also tell our marketing team not to yell at me for putting it out there.
They'll thank you as you unlock more cash flow for the business. It's okay.
Yes, exactly. There we go.
Awesome. Ali, Kevin, thank you for having such a good, open, honest, fun conversation on this today. I think it's an important piece. People always think about chasing the next raise and, probably the amount of time, energy, and effort they do because there's like that cortisol release when you hear you've got funding. I think some of that energy transparently should be deployed against all other means of funding and capital for your organization and unlocking cash flow through smart things like shred credits, proactively, but not too proactively, for full-time employees, part-time employees, contractors, and some consumables. There's like a lot of value here. And people, like you said, if they don't know where to start, they should at least ask and get some perspective. And the reality is they're probably sitting on some value that they don't even know. Yeah. So thank you for joining us today. Insightful conversation as always. Thank you to everyone that tuned in. Hope you found this to be another useful business-based conversation around rocket fuel to hopefully help you build your startup, or if you're working in a startup, or if you're just building a business. Hopefully you found some value out of today's conversation. And thanks again for tuning in. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Kevin.